Hi, I'm Simon Gerrans, former Australian cyclist, and you're listening to the Physical Performance Show.
And the winner is...
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by Precision Hydration's brand new fuel range, the Physical Performance Show's very own Learnings membership, and our upcoming live stream event featuring Rinny McGregor, fueling the endurance athlete. I'm Brad Beer, sports physiotherapist and exercise scientist by trade and training, and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week, we'll bring you the latest and greatest information and inspiration designed to help you perform at your physical best. And of course, we do this across a range of our different episodes, interest editions, coaches' corners, featured performers, expert editions, and catch-up episodes. Now, here we are off the back of the 2020/2021 Tokyo Olympic Games. And what a 2-week period for performances it was. Now, in the coming episodes, you'll enjoy hearing from some of our endurance sporting stars around their Tokyo 2020-21 campaigns, including the men's triathlon podium and the all-conquering Great British Team Relay. But today you're set to enjoy a conversation with Australian cycling legend Simon Gerrans. And when it comes to scheduling recordings with guests of the show, some are in play for many months trying to align schedules, and some happen within one day. Or in the case of Simon Gerrans, overnight. You see, Simon had just returned from a commentary gig with the Tour de France 2021 race edition and was stuck in hotel quarantine in Brisbane, Australia. I reached out and voila, we were able to secure Simon for this recording. Now, apologies in advance, the audio quality of my microphone was far less than usual. You see, I forgot my normal recording microphone. When I raced to the clinic to record the episode, I left it at home. So in advance, apologies for the lesser quality of my voice. Simon's is terrific, the consummate professional that he is. Now, by way of bio, where do you start with an Australian cycling legend like Simon Gerrans? Well, let's start here. Simon's professional career took place between 2005 and 2018. Simon was the Australian road cycling champion on 2 occasions, 2012 and 2014. Simon was the 4 times winner of the Tour Down Under, 2006, 12, 14 and 16, the most in the history of the event. And Simon's been the first and only Australian to win stages across all 3 Grand Tours, the Tour de France, Volta and the Gyro. Simon enjoyed the yellow jersey in the Tour de France in 2013 and has been a dual Australian Olympian 2008 and 2012. And during today's conversation, you'll hear from Simon around his career highs, lows, and the many learnings along the way. It's been an incredible journey for Simon, from getting onto a push bike after injuring his knee on motorbikes, through to the serendipity of having Australian cycling great Phil Anderson as a neighbour in rural Victoria, all the way to conquering the world and dealing with the challenges of 7 fractures in 1 year in 2015. Here is my conversation with Australian cycling great Simon Gerrans. Simon Gerrans, you are in lockdown there in Brisbane, and according to you, there's not much other stuff on your agenda other than doing a podcast for the Physical Performance Show on a Sunday afternoon. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. I'm actually one step further than lockdown. I'm in quarantine.
Sorry?
I'm in a hotel and I can't. Yeah, I think you're in lockdown and I'm in quarantine, so I've taken it to the next level.
But in all seriousness, how have you found that coming back from seemingly roaming pretty freely in Europe, covering the Tour de France 2021 edition, commentary for the event, to sort of coming back to sitting in a hotel room? How, as an active guy who's normally out and about, how are you going?
Well, I am trying to keep myself reasonably active while I'm here in hotel quarantine, but it's a stark contrast from what I've been doing over the past 6 weeks. So I travelled over to Europe. I did a couple of sort of weeks of business stuff with the business that I'm running, the service course, and then rolled into the commentary position at the Tour de France, where you're literally on the move every day. And they're super busy days, super long days. Each day we're sort of on the move by sort of 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and very rarely at our hotel before sort of 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. So on the move every day practically for 6 weeks to come back here, land in Brisbane, and then just be cooped up in one room for the following 2 weeks. So it's a pretty big contrast.
Were you a bit nervous about going into one room, or you've already done it before through the pandemic?
This is not my first experience in hotel quarantine. So my family and I actually relocated back to Australia late last year. So I went through the hotel quarantine process, however, with 3 kids and my wife, who was fairly heavily pregnant at the time. So that was a very different hotel quarantine experience. That was about keeping the kids entertained for as much of the day as possible, as well as trying to get some work done. This time it's very quiet. Obviously, I've just really dove into my work to pass the time. It's been great to have the Olympics going as well, because that sort of kept me entertained. But I've also just tried to use this time as well to do a few things with my body that I haven't had the time to do for a number of years. So some basic rehab stuff, funnily enough, that I used to do quite consistently throughout my racing career that I've quite literally neglected for the past couple of years.
Can you give an example, Simon, of what some of these basic rehab things are that you've neglected?
Well, because I had a number of injuries throughout my racing career. I broke my collarbone 3 times. I had sort of 7 surgeries on one side. So as I'm sure you're aware, that to get the rubber band back out again and just do some postural work again, as well as just some stretching, particularly over the past sort of month, the fact that I was in the commentary booth for 8 hours a day and sitting on a plastic chair, your body just binds up, as well as the sort of 3 or 4 hour transfer in the car every day too. So it's just been really nice just to start each day with doing some core exercises, doing some stretching, doing some postural work, and just give sort of my body a bit of attention in that way again.
And apart from the body work you just mentioned, you're still finding time, I presume, to be out on 2 wheels quite often, apart from the fact that you're in quarantine at the moment.
Yeah, listen, I still try and ride my bike on a regular basis. It may only be once or twice a week for, anywhere between an hour or so up to maybe 3 hours if I can find the time on a weekend. So it's definitely very much a part of my weekly routine, not so much a daily routine. I've sort of got a lot else going on in my life at the moment. So the structured sort of training I haven't done for a long, long time, but I still love getting out my bike. It's still a very social thing for me to do. And it's a great way of reconnecting with so many of my friends that I met through cycling. Yeah,
and over such a long and esteemed career, Gyro, the start of your career, I just love your backstory. Before we explore the highs, lows and learnings of your career, your backstory growing up in Mansfield, rural Victoria. Your next door neighbour happened to be Phil Anderson, all-time great Australian cyclist. I think I've still got a signed Phil Anderson Peugeot black and white jersey from the Grafton Varel somewhere in my closet, Simon. So talk about serendipity.
Yeah, and literally quite simply for me, it was just right time at the right place. The fact that I'd injured my knee. I had some horrific knee injuries through crashing motorbikes growing up on a farm in country Victoria. I needed to do some rehab, so I sort of started cycling for a little bit of rehab just to get my knee moving again. And at that time, Phil Anderson was retiring from his professional racing career and doing his coaching levels. And as a part of his coaching levels, he needed to write a training program for someone. And he could see that I was going through my rehab. I was taking a bit of an interest in cycling. And he said, well, if you're interested in cycling, how about I write you a training program? So from quite literally week 1, when I was out riding my bike on the road, I was doing it to a training program that was written by the greatest Australian cyclists of all time, basically at that point. So I was really fortunate to have Phil a part of my life. He was a family friend and really give me some great guidance right from the beginning.
And at what point, I mean, that's incredible, but at what point in this beginning, Simon, as you said, you transferred over from several injuries from the motorbike scene with knee reconstructions, you found cycling. But at what point, it's one thing to have the serendipity of a neighbour such as Phil Anderson, but it's another thing to actually have some raw talent and some ingredients to work with. At what point did you start to really have ambitions for cycling beyond enjoying it and also realise that you had some real talent?
Well, I think it was quite a slow process, actually. And what I loved and what really drew me to cycling at that point in time was I was always a very competitive kid. Whatever I was having a go at, like, okay, where can I race or where can I do a competition? I was constantly testing myself. And what I loved about cycling was the fact that there were just so many different layers to the sport. There was so many different grades and races to aim for, right from, your local club race that you could line up in as a kid to watching the Tour de France on television and think, oh, well, that's where I want to get to. But it wasn't all about thinking about the Tour de France. It was all about thinking about getting from C grade to B grade as the first goal. And then, it was moving through those ranks. So that's what I loved about the sport. There were so many different layers and so many different things to aim for. And as far as when I was sort of identified that I may have had some ability or have the possibility of taking the sport to the next level. Phil probably wasn't the first person to identify that. Phil was, really he was a great help in getting me started and probably getting me to sort of a state institute type level, where then I was sort of surrounded by people that probably identified the fact that I had some ability and was going to be able to take it to my sport to Europe and eventually maybe turn professional. But it probably wasn't until I turned professional that Phil sort of said, oh, wow, I never thought that you had that in you. When I first lined up in my first Tour de France in my first year pro, is when he probably thought, oh, well, actually, he's probably got something here.
And that was, I believe, 2005.
Yeah, that's right. That was 2005 because, I was a late starter to the sport. It probably took me a little while to come up to speed in comparison to a number of kids or young guys my age. A lot of the guys I was racing against, because I never really started competing till I was second year junior, they'd been racing since they were sort of under 15. So they really knew what they were doing, where I was really kind of learning on the fly as I was sort of maturing as well. So I was a late maturer and I was a late sort of learner to the sport, but I was a real student of the sport as well. I was I think I was very astute and I was really good at sort of learning on the fly, reflecting on each race and working out what I was going to do to improve next time around. So I was a late starter, but I sort of come up to speed relatively quickly. But I only turned professional when I was 25 or 24, turning 25. And that was in 2005. So I turned professional quite late in the piece.
Which really I find fascinating, Gyro, in the sense that between 20 and 25, so many people are starting their careers, whether it's studying at a tertiary level or, whatever it may be. You must have had a real sense of belief in yourself to go, right, yes, I'm not signed on as a 21-year-old. We see Tadej Pogacar winning the Tour de France these days at 21, or a young Ben O'Connor doing well, 4th overall in the Tour in debut. You must have had a real sense of purpose and destiny about you to not panic and go, well, I haven't made it by 25. I'm going to continue. What was it that gave you that belief and that ability to stick with it?
Oh, don't get me wrong. That comes in ebbs and troughs. You go through phases where you completely committed and you really believe in what you're doing, and you go through elements of doubt as well. It's not like you go through that whole period of time with this just strong belief that you're going to make it the whole time, because there are constant setbacks throughout that process. I was just passionate about it and I loved it and I loved what I was doing, and I was constantly felt like I was progressing in the sport. But it was actually in 2004 that I sort of identified, okay, this is my last crack at it. This is my last shot to Europe. If I don't sort of get a professional contract off the back end of this year, I don't want to be the guy that's still rolling around at sort of 27, 28 years of age in amateur teams, basically doing it for nothing. I want to get on with my life and forge a career doing something else. So it was 2004. So I traveled to Europe. I raced with a French amateur team. So I was 23, turning 24 in that year, and I had the best year, of my career. I won a bunch of races, and I got selected for a stagiaire role and eventually a contract with AG2R off the back of that. So from that point on, it was really when my career really felt like it started.
Can you remember? Obviously you can, but what was that first ride in the pro peloton like? You're on contract, you're salaried, and I think it was AG2R where you started with your first pro team in Division 1. What was that like, that first season?
Oh, it was a fantastic first season, and I took I took grasp of it with both hands. I set myself some goals. I ticked those off throughout the year. I managed to get selected to compete in the Tour de France in my first season professional, and that was never done before and hasn't been done since with the AG Tour formation. So they really identified that I had some potential. I think I won 4 races in my first year professionally in that team, and that was on par with their big team leaders at the time in AG2R. That was Jean-Patrick Nazon, who was their sprinter. So it was a fantastic experience for me, my first year pro, and I picked up so much. I matured so much. I got so much stronger throughout the year, and I felt like I just kind of went from strength to strength after that.
Did you get a few SMSs from Phil Anderson?
Yeah, well, I'd check in with Phil every now and then. I saw him at the Tour de France, and we'd touch base every once in a while. But, every now and then Phil and I would keep in touch. But as far as that first experience goes, going back to your question, we're really fortunate in Australia to have some great races, Australian-based races. So, like, I competed in the Tour Down Under a couple of times previous to that with a national formation or with an under-23 team. So you kind of got a bit of a feel of what the pro peloton was like before I was doing that week in, week out.
Yeah, and, you mentioned the Tour Down Under. 4 times Tour Down Under champion. Your resume is just phenomenal, Simon. Your achievements, 2 times Australian road champion, dual Australian Olympian, first Australian to win a stage across all 3 major Grand Tours. The list goes on. And I know you would have been asked this before many times, but is there a performance that you look back on with the most fondness that just sort of stands greater than the others? If so, why?
A performance, like from a pure physical performance wise, there are a couple of points in my career where I felt like, I was absolutely on that day, and that didn't necessarily equate to a win on the day. So I look at certain races and go, okay, I was performing at my absolute best at that point in time. For me, the 2014 season, I had a couple of those performances, particularly leading into the World Championships that year where I finished second. And I just felt like I was the strongest bike rider on that course in the world on that day, and the tactics didn't go my way, and I wasn't able to win the race. So from a pure athletic performance-wise, I can sort of highlight sort of the period around September of 2014 as my peak in physical performance. And as far as results go, though, I think some of the most satisfying results came when I wasn't the strongest guy in the race, and tactically, I was better than the guys around me. Maybe they underestimated me, and I was able to sort of perform and win on that day through a combination of obviously really good form, but being tactically very good too.
So that's interesting that you've been able to sort of differentiate that into results, but also then your peak of your powers, if you like, September 2014. What was it like at the end of that World Champs, coming so close with the silver and not quite getting those rainbow stripes around your arm? I mean, you've got the green and gold from the Australian road titles.
Oh yeah, I was devastated not to win on that day, and but I felt like physically I was at my very best, and it was just something that slipped through my fingers as far from a tactical perspective from myself and from the team's way we went about the race as well. So I was devastated because I knew, that was my one shot to win a world title, and, I would swap any number of my other results throughout my career for that win. So I was really disappointed at that time. But I think what's really important in your racing career is you don't sort of celebrate the victories for too long. You don't get caught up on the defeats for too long either. You've got to learn how to move on really quickly. So I moved on from that and set myself some new objectives. But yeah, it's pretty safe to say that I was devastated on the day.
Yeah, gosh, and not the first Australian to come so close. Obviously, Robbie McEwen knocked on that championship title a couple of times there, so close. Simon, one of my favourite sports documentaries, and I haven't been able to watch it as many times as I would like because I just can't seem to find where I can get it. But that is Orica Green Edge's All for One. I remember watching it, returning from some work with Super League Triathlon on a flight from Europe, and just fell in love with the story. It must have been, it's the bulk of your professional career riding for Green Edge Orica. It must have been some ride from the early inception to, the outstanding success that the team had with team time trial victories, individual victories. Must have been quite the ride.
Yeah, it certainly was quite the ride, and it was quite unique initially as well. They managed to build a team with a very unique culture and a very Australian sort of backbone, I guess, to the team. And it was fantastic to line up alongside many of the guys that you'd raced with at World Championships, Olympic Games, and guys that were sort of your mates in the sport, and to be all in one team together was a fantastic experience. And I think we all bonded really well together as a team, and it was very special at the time. There was, there's some challenges with the team as well. So there was some big highs and lows, don't get me wrong, through those first couple of years. But one thing I really felt like we did do in those first few years of that team is we really committed to one another and focused and gave everything for our objectives and to get the wins for the team. I felt like the team sort of phased out of that a little bit in the latter years. It became a lot more international, and that really unique Australian side of the team probably got diluted quite a lot, and it wasn't the same sort of – it was a very different team in 2017 for my last season there versus sort of 2012, 13 and 14 when it started.
Any examples, Simon, of committing to one another where it just came together? I mean, that time trial victory was one for the ages, team time trial victory.
Yeah, absolutely. There were a number of occasions in that 2013 Tour de France where I was able to win stage 3 in a sort of sprint finish, and that was very much a team effort, delivering me to that sort of sprint finish, and then to sort of continue riding on that high and win the team's time trial the next day, which put me in the yellow jersey, were a couple of real sort of highlight points, because you look at the team that we had, we didn't have the strongest sort of team on paper there. There are a number of big powerhouse teams like Quickstep, like Team Sky, for example. But as a combination of riders that we really got together, we really got the best out of each other and were able to put in the best time on the day.
Yeah, and get that historic victory. You mentioned that in 2014, September, you're at the peak of your powers, arguably. Was there anything special about your preparation for that season, or did they all look quite similar, or were they just varied depending on injuries, crashes, collarbones, etc.? Was there anything about that preparation?
I found that I had my best European seasons when I put in my sort of best performances actually in the Australian summer to get the season started. And I really found that if I put in a massive and really solid foundation in my pre-season, I could just get to a certain level early on that I could maintain throughout the year. And it was all about, for me, having micro breaks throughout the season, never really chopping my season up too much, which I had to do because I would sort of jam 4 objectives or 4 sort of peaks into a season. So to do that, you couldn't really afford to come down for too long before you had to start sort of building up again for your next peak. So 2014, I think, like I did also in 2012, where both those years I won the Australian Championships, I probably put in my biggest pre-seasons in those seasons. So it was really a matter of putting in a great foundation and really staying close to the top of my form for most of the year.
Working harder and smarter.
Yeah, I was obviously working really hard, but I had a really great relationship with my coach as well, who I'd worked with for the vast majority of my career. And we just knew each other really well. We had a great rapport, great relationship. And he'd sort of followed my career from my last season amateur right up until I worked with him until 2016. And we just really knew what worked well. He knew exactly what sort of efforts would get me into great form, and I was pretty good at giving sort of feedback to my sensations as well.
And were there any key? We spoke with fellow countryman, professional cyclist Adam Hansen some time ago, who sort of outlined some key workouts that varied throughout the course of the season, but were just key constituents of his training cycle or week. It was 10-day, I think his cycle may have been from memory. But any key ingredients in that recipe, Simon?
For me, it was mostly about simulating race efforts. I would do a lot of motor pacing when I was as part of my training, and really try and do a lot of climbing and high-end efforts behind the motorbike. So just to simulate that race sensation, as well as a lot of sort of lactate recovery sort of efforts too. So it was really dependent on where I was in my season but it was all about simulating the upcoming race effort. So I would traditionally do quite well on circuit type races, and that was just about doing repetitive efforts, just over and over again, just work hard, short recovery, work hard again. And I do this for hours and hours.
Really? As in like 5-minute effort, or it could vary from a short interval to a long interval, or just depended?
Well, it really depended on what the race was. But say, for example, leading up to the Ardennes Classics each year, which were always a big goal of mine. So they were sort of the later spring classics in the Ardennes regions, the races like Amstel Gold and Liège Bastogne Liège. There were a lot of sort of 5-minute climbs in that race. That was all about doing, a 5-minute type effort with a 30-second all-out sort of sprint off the back of that effort, a short recovery, and then you do it again. And because that's what the racing was, that's what those races were all about at the difficult end of the race. So it was just about replicating that in training.
And I guess Zwift or any of these online smart trainers weren't really quite as prevalent then. So this has mostly been done outdoors, I presume, on the road.
Yeah, that was all done outdoors on the road. I would use a trainer. Like you said, the smart trainers weren't really around, but I always had an ergo at home where I would really use that to do my short explosive training. And that might have been your 20-40s, your 30-30 type sort of effort, because it was a controlled environment. You weren't at the liberty of getting stuck behind a car or coming up to an intersection or traffic lights or anything like that. You could just sit there and you could punch the effort out and really do a sort of a calculated approach to it.
And over the season, Simon, what sort of role did testing play in your year? Were you quite regimented around that, or was it the mercy of the team that you were riding for at the time, or how did that look for you?
I didn't do a lot of lab testing throughout the year. There was always a little bit done quite early on in the season. It was, I think, looking back to the Green Edge days, and we had the likes of the Australian Institute of Sport where we go and do a training camp. I would always try and do a test as well at the Victorian Institute of Sport just to get get a gauge on how my pre-season training was progressing. But once I got to Europe, it was more on the road. It was pretty rare that I would do a lab test once we were over in Europe. But with the information that you're able to gather from power meters and so forth, you're able to get a pretty good indicator of your level on the road. So
data has always played part of it for you, but it seems like professional cyclists all have some sort of different sentiments around testing. Some hold it dearly and others are less, I guess, precious about it.
Well, testing is always good to know where you're at for your training levels, basically. Some riders, they really feel like that they treat tests like their races. They put a lot of emphasis on testing really well, But myself, I was never that great in the lab. My numbers were never overly impressive. My strengths as a rider was that I was able to put out close to my best numbers at the back end of a 6-hour race. Like I could still put 90% of my max power out after 6 hours of racing. So that's not something that you can measure in a lab. That's more about, the consistency and hard work and still being able to sort of perform under immense fatigue.
Great example of that being your 2014 Australian road title. You just ground it down. You ground it out. How many hours was that? 6 hours plus?
The Australian road title wasn't an overly long race. It's sort of generally around 180 kilometres, but it's more when you refer to like a classic, for example, and those races are sort of, I think Milan-San Remo, when I won that was a 7-hour race. And again, to be able to put out close to your peak power after a 7-hour classic is what makes the difference.
You're listening to episode 282 with featured performer Simon Gerrans, Australian cycling legend, 4 times winner of the Tour Down Under. Support for today's show comes from Precision Hydration. I spoke with Andy Blow, co-founder of Precision Hydration, back on episode 234 around all things hydration science. It's a very popular episode with lots of great feedback, where the key takeaway was there is not a one-size-fits-all solution for hydration. Now, the Precision Hydration team are doing the same for fueling as they have for hydration. Precision Hydration have just released their brand new fuel range, designed to help you understand how much carbohydrate you need to perform at your best. In the past, fueling has been deemed somewhat of a dark art, trial and error, but Precision Hydration are trying to remove that process to give us certainty and a systematic approach to figuring out our race day fueling. You can take Precision Hydration's quick carb calculator to get a fueling recommendation, then book a free one-to-one video consult with the team to refine not only your fueling but also your hydration strategy for your next race. Once you know your numbers, you can use the new Precision Fuel 30 gels and Precision Fuel 30 drink mixes to hit them. Each product contains 30 grams of carbohydrate to make it easier for you to keep track of your intake and ensure you're getting enough fuel in to perform at your best during training and racing. Now, as a listener of the Physical Performance Show, you can receive 15% off your first order of Precision Hydration, electrolytes and the all-new Precision Fuel range by using the code TPPS capitals at the checkout precisionhydration.com. Support for today's show is also brought to you by our upcoming live stream event featuring UK-based sports dietitian and author Rinny McGregor, Fueling the Endurance Athlete. It's set for the 4th of September, 3 to 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Time. However, if you are not in that time zone, do not be concerned. A post-event recording will be made available to all registrants. Now, tickets are $49 and are available over at pogophysio.com.au/Rinny McGregor live stream, or jump over onto Instagram and there you'll find the bio link. We have 100 seats available and registrations are fast closing, so don't miss out on this great live stream event, Rinny McGregor, Fueling the Endurance Athlete. And of course, today's episode is also brought to you by Pogo Physio's online telehealth consultations. It's simple. If you are a runner, triathlete, cyclist, endurance athlete struggling with a bone, tendon or joint related concern, then there is no barrier that exists geographically with online telehealth consultations. You can receive an accurate diagnosis and immediate implementation of the right rehab program that will get you back to your physical best. Jump over to pogophysio.com.au/telehealth to schedule your 45-minute online consultation with myself or any of the Pogo Physio team. For now, let's jump back with this week's featured performer, Australian cycling legend, 4 times winner of the Tour Down Under, Simon Gerrans.
Gyro, the darkest day in your career. We themed this show the highs, lows and learnings. The darkest day. I imagine there's been many.
Yeah. Listen, when you have a career as long as what I had there, you never go through without some difficult periods as well. My darkest day, it's hard to put a finger on what my darkest day was. I had a pretty rough season in 2015 off the back of what was the best year of my career in 2014. So I really had a difficult time through that whole year, and it just seems like if there was a crash, then I tended to be in it, and every time I hit the deck, I felt like I broke a bone. And I think throughout the course of 2015, I broke 7 bones or something like that. Every time that I started to get back into shape again, I'd have another setback. So 2015 was really difficult for me. Right from the beginning, I broke my collarbone in my pre-season training. It was just a couple of days before Christmas in a mountain biking crash. So that sort of sidelined me for Tour Down Under, where I was sort of going back to defend my title there. My first race in Europe was Classic Eroica or Strade Bianche, and I fell there and I broke my elbow. I came back, worked really hard to come back from that. I missed a lot of my important preparation races for the Ardennes Classics. I got caught up in a big fall in Liège-Bastogne-Liège. So it was just like every time I was coming back into form again, I get caught up with the crash and I was hurting myself. So I just had a super tough year throughout 2015. I ended up tried to finish my season quite early, had a really short break, put in a good pre-season, and I came back and I won the 2016 Tour Down Under for the 4th time. So that was a really tough year. So yeah, it's hard to say one darkest moment, but that was just a bit of a tough year, I think.
Gosh, I mean, obviously, you know that your fortune must shift. But you know, as an example, coming out with that 4th Tour Down Under victory, but that's pretty rough. I did hear as I was researching for this, Gyro, you mentioned on a podcast, and the names escape me, that particular podcast, but where you said some of the pro riders would come up to you and put their hands on your back and just say, hey, look, keep going, this will turn.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was, some guys that I had a lot of respect for in the peloton, they'd literally come up and say, you're not doing anything wrong here. And you're just going through a really unlucky patch in your career. And they were right. You know, you go through these difficult moments and, you know, you just got to keep getting back up again and fronting up, and, you know, you get through it to hopefully enjoy more success in the future.
One of the things I love as a physio about the pro peloton is just the toughness. I mean, You hit the deck, you have a touchdown, normally fractures of some sort, and normally days before you're back on the bike trying to maintain fitness and build again. I mean, it's normal from your vantage point when you're inside that. From the outside world looking in, it's quite the feat. Do you just get better at the suffering, or is it something you're just innately born with? What do you reckon? Or it's just part of the job?
I think as an endurance athlete, you become accustomed to suffering. That's what your life's all about. And when you get to that really high level, it's actually, who can suffer for the longest and who can go the deepest that really win the races. But you're right, professional cyclists are a bit of a unique breed. And it was, commentating the Tour de France this year where there were so many horrific crashes. It was on stage one, there were a couple of big crashes, and Marc Soler finished the stage with 2 broken wrists. Type thing. And you hear of guys, limping in with collarbone injury or collarbone fractures and big lineup for the X-ray machine after the stage. And you think, well, these guys are pretty unique. And I experienced that as well. I'd finished stages of Grand Tours with broken bones, and you just don't want to give up because, once you step off, that's it. You're not lining back up again the next day. So you push through however you can to finish the stage and complete the race. But cyclists are pretty unique when it comes to that, that's for sure.
Yeah, just so impressive. This year's tour, Caleb Ewan's crash in the sprint, I forget the stage number, but watching his team's little video about him after it, this guy's just hit the deck at maybe 70K, 60-something K an hour, and he's walking off the course. He's walking into the hotel room at the other side with half his butt hanging out his cycling necks. It's quite something. Gerro, I've heard you say that there's nothing that's impossible if you do the hard yards and you're consistent. Any other ingredients for the psychological side of persevering, as you say, a life spent of suffering?
No, but that resilience and that perseverance is a real key. And, you see it time and time again. You get someone come into the sport and they're showing huge potential, but they don't have the ability to just be consistent in their training and and commit consistently to the sport, and they never last long. So it's the guys that sort of have good careers and really stay at the top level for a long time. They're so passionate about what they do, and they front up day in, day out, and they're really consistent in their approach. So for me, that is a key ingredient. And there's a great saying, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work, and that's really what it stands out in professional cycling.
Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work.
Yeah, work beats talent when talent doesn't work. Yeah,
wow. As you just mentioned, there's people that come into the sport, they're talented but not as committed. Is the difference just the passion they have? Or, what is it? Some stick, some don't, some are prepared to do the work. I guess it's like any endeavour in life, not just pro cycling.
Yeah, and I think it is. It's just that passion for the sport. And for me, it's really interesting when you hear of athletes talking about how they made all these sacrifices for their sport. And for me, the sort of time I had in my sport, I didn't feel like I was making any sacrifices whatsoever because I was so passionate about it. That's exactly what I wanted to do. So to put everything in my life really aside and make my performances on the bike and my cycling the most important thing was easy. And I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything else because that's exactly what I wanted to be doing. So when you hear of an athlete go, I sacrificed so much for this, you wonder how long those athletes are going to be at the highest level for, because if their sport is not the most important thing, they're not going to stay at the top level for very long.
Gerro, what do you think's happening in the pro peloton for the victory age to be seemingly coming down? We see Masters riders extending careers at Valverde. There's, lots of great examples of that riding into their late 30s and even early 40s still in the peloton. But the rise of the youth, it's quite remarkable. What do you attribute that to? Is it just a set of circumstance? What is it? I'm fascinated.
Well, I don't think Valverde is a great example because he's an exception to most rules. For a guy to be performing at the level that he's still racing at 41, he's a freak of nature. So he's not a great example. But I think going on to why young riders are performing at such a high level early on in their careers or at such a young age, what I think that really comes down to, the fact the level of information that's been available to these guys for so long. The fact that a guy like Tadej Pogačar, for example, he's been riding since a young age. but nothing surer he would have had a power meter on his bike from about 15. So for him, by the time he gets to the professional ranks, he's going to have 5 or 6 years of fantastic data to analyse and to look at and to know what sort of workload or what sort of stimulation is going to bring him into his best condition. He's also obviously, he's physiologically, he's something special, but it's just that availability of information that the young guys have now for so long by the time they turn professional is, I think, a big reason why they're performing at such a high level at a younger age. Whereas you look back a few years and say, for example, when I first turned professional, my training was done to a heart rate monitor, and I actually had to buy my first power meter because the team weren't supplying them. And it was only after a few years of racing professionally that, you start to accumulate this experience and this information that you're able to sort of structure your seasons and your training to get your best performances consistently. Whereas these guys, they've had that, that available since they were young kids.
Yeah, fascinating. I've heard you cite that if there's a talented junior rider coming into the pro ranks, that it's not necessarily required anymore to do the tour of duty, if you like, of serving the team for X amount of seasons or years to then be able to be the appointed race leader. That some of the cultural side of the teams have shifted to be, right, we're going to ride for this individual for this purpose.
No, that's right, because I think every race is really important to the teams now, and those performances are so crucial. So they're not always going to turn to the guy that's been doing it for the longest or the guys that's performed in the past. They're going to actually look at it and go, who's our best chance of a result today? We don't care if it's his first race with the team. He's our best shot. We need results, so we're going with this guy.
It's everything's shifted, advanced.
Yeah, it's changed. The sport's changed. It really has changed a lot.
You're listening to episode 282 of the Physical Performance Show, featuring Simon Gerrans on this featured performer episode, Australian cycling legend, sharing on his career highs, lows, and many learnings. If you missed last week's episode, it was an expert edition that is a must listen for any coach, athlete, or practitioner working with runners. It was an exploration of all things prevention of bone stress injuries in runners with Professor Stuart Warden of Indiana University. It's been a very popular episode, well shared around, with lots of great feedback. And here's a snippet of Professor Stuart Warden's share-ins.
Increase your distance before you increase your intensity. Build up your base in terms of distance, your mileage, or think about what is that you want to get to. A lot of people have these, I want to get to 100 miles a week. I was like, well, why? Get to some sort of level, something that's feasible. Get up to that sort of level by running lots of easy miles. Right? We're not talking about a lot of intensity work. Then once you've got your base, that mileage base at a certain level, then start adding your intensity. But as you add your intensity, drop your mileage a little bit. Right, so mileage first, then intensity.
To enjoy the full episode, jump over to wherever it is that you enjoy the Physical Performance Show from. You'll find us on YouTube now, and of course across all podcast platforms. For now, let's jump back with this week's featured performer, Australian cycling great, 4 times winner of the Tour Down Under, and the only Australian to have won a stage in every Grand Tour, Tour de France, Volta and Gyro, Simon Gerrans.
Ready for a performance round, Gyro? This is a rapid-fire series of questions. Training session most disliked?
The lactate threshold efforts. Yeah, 15. My coach used to have to do me these efforts where it was kind of 15 seconds on, full sprint, 15 recovery, 3 times over. So by your last 15-second sprint where you're trying to basically sprint under full lactic, it worked really well, but I dreaded them.
And how many, was it just the 3 or you do that on loop?
You do that on loop. So we generally do 3 or 4 sets of those with about 5 minutes in between each one. Brutal.
Training session most loved. What did Simon Gerrans most enjoy?
The race simulation stuff that we were talking about a little bit earlier. So that the motor pacing, I love motor pacing, and just doing some sort of threshold stuff and sprints off a motorbike. So really training at high speed is what I like to do.
Favourite pre-race meal? Gerard, I presume it shifted over the years and depending on geography to some degree.
My favourite pre-race meal, night before I loved to eat something like risotto. I was always found that pasta didn't agree with me so well, so I would always sort of turn more to the rice dishes. So something like a risotto the night before and morning of a race, something really plain like a ham and cheese omelette and again plate of plain rice. So it's pretty basic stuff.
What would you sort of take in during the rides? Depends on obviously the duration and everything else, but were there set things or it was dependent on the sponsors and everything else?
Yeah, there were set things, but I used to try and keep a pretty good routine in my longer races and my objectives. A really basic one is I would try and eat something every half an hour, quite simply, throughout the duration of a race. And every time you would eat, you'd obviously drink something as well. But what you would eat over the duration of the race would change a lot from the beginning to after sort of 6 hours. And I'd really try and start with the solid foods, something maybe a little bit protein orientated, to working towards your energy bars more in the middle of the race, to your pure sugars and your gels towards the end. And that was all about having the energy available for the required effort.
So eating something solid every half an hour was one of those disciplines you persisted with through your career.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's something that I learned early on in my career. You get it wrong every now and then. You learn by your mistakes quite early on. But towards the end, I knew that was a sort of a protocol that worked really well for me.
Who's the athlete that Simon Gerrans most admires and why? Tough one, I know.
Yeah, that is a tough one. I was always a big admirer of Roger Federer. And obviously completely different sport, completely different, way you go about things in tennis. But I really admired his approach, how sort of meticulous he was. He was an absolute gentleman as well with how he went about things. So, yeah, I was always a Roger Federer fan.
Not the first athlete to say that, featured performer, Gyro, so that's great. The toughest competitor you ever raced against, who would that be and why? This would be hard. Lots of names.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. And, because there are different guys at different points in my racing career. Philippe Gilbert was always a very impressive competitor. Philippe Gilbert at his best, he was super hard to beat. He had a couple of seasons there and there was a couple of specific races where he was so hard to beat. So I'm going to say Philippe Gilbert.
Best recovery tip, Gerro?
Sleep.
Nice. I presume you're sleeping well in quarantine, hey? Just distraction-free.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I don't sleep that well now. But, sleep is the key. It's all about, structured sleep. I used to nap a lot throughout my career as well. I wasn't good at sitting still. I was always a super active guy. Always kept myself really busy. But, sleep's always the key.
One word to describe your racing style. What was it? What is it?
Oh, one word to describe my racing style. Calculated.
Calculated. How would you describe being in the zone?
Being in the zone is a really special place to be when you're on your peak form and you're in a key moment of the race, because you're no longer thinking. You're not thinking about anything whatsoever. You're just quite simply reacting. And you're relying on your experiences, you're relying on your training, you're relying on your teammates, and you just react. You don't think. And I think that's what it's like to be in the zone.
When was the last time you were in that zone, Gerro?
Oh, not from at a sporting level, not for a couple of years. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, but that's a special place. And finally, Gerro, to get out of the physical performance round, the toughest training session you can recall. We know that epic sessions don't make champions, but it's still a fun question, right?
One of the toughest training sessions that I can recall. Okay. I can't remember the absolute specifics of the session itself, but I remember going back again in the 2014 season. I was doing a block of altitude training after the Tour de France, and I was up at a place in Italy on the Swiss border called Livigno, and it's a pretty common place where a lot of professional cyclists, cyclists based in Europe, will go and do an altitude training camp. And I was up there preparing for the back end of that season. I was already starting my Worlds prep, basically. And Dave Sanders, who was the coach of the Victorian Institute of Sport, and he was actually doing a little bit of work for Cycling Australia and at the time Orica Green Edge, he'd come over and he was helping with my training. So we hired a little scooter up there or sourced it somewhere. And Davo was taking me out motor pacing. I remember doing this one day. It was a 6.5 or a 7 hour session that we quite literally did. It was all pretty much within 5 kilometres of where we were staying in Livigno at altitude. And it was basically we're just going up and down the side of this hill. Effort, recovery. And I think, we did something like 50 repeats of this climb in atrocious conditions. It was such a long day that it was sunny to start with in the rain, and it started snowing, and then it was sunny again, and it was just all day nonstop like this. And there were other groups of professional cyclists up there literally shaking their head as they were watching us going up and down the side of the hill, as they were sheltering from the weather in a cafe on the roadside. And guys like, Peter Sagan was sitting there just watching me going up and down the hill. And it was a brutal session, and it was absolute torture to Davo on the motorbike. But he was not going to give up on that session while I was prepared to do it, because he knew that, I was working so hard. I was so driven for my goal. And he just toughed it out for the day, and he must have been frozen on that motorbike.
Oh, wow. That's an epic story. How many Ks, or what was the elevation of this climb in approximate terms?
Oh, it was only about a 5-minute climb.
Okay.
Yeah, it was literally up, and we found a little turnaround point, back down again, turnaround point, back up again. And it was literally, and we were doing it, at various intensities. Some of them were quite easy. Some of them it was slow at the start to full speed at the top. Some of it was threshold with a sprint. It was just a really varied approach to the effort, but it was about just doing that effort recovery, time and time again.
Wow, that's epic. You're out of the performance round, so thanks for taking us there. You just used the word driven. Where does, when I think of your career as a cyclist, and obviously you've gone on to different things in the corporate space now, and even looking from afar at your corporate work, that word is a word I find synonymous with Simon Gerrans, and that is driven. Where's the drive come from? As you've touched on today, not everyone has that drive. Some of these guys were sitting, other athletes having drinks in a cafe while you were grinding it out on the hill. What has driven Simon Gerrans over the years?
I'm not sure what's driven myself over the years, but I've always been very goal-orientated throughout my racing career, and even what I've done post racing career as well. So I think, it's having objectives, it's having attainable objectives, and it's having, attainable objectives on the way to your big goal as well has always been really important for me. So I've never been one that sort of set a goal that's in a year's time or even 6 months' time and say that's all I'm thinking about. For me, it was all about setting objectives for every single training session. Every time I clipped into my bike, I had something to achieve on that day, and really it was really planned, really calculated, and really a sort of astute with how I would prepare for those goals. So I think, I was always really driven because I always had something in the near future that I was working towards.
That goal orientation. Gyro, you've been very generous with your time, and there's 2 final set questions. And the first is this: if you could boil everything you've learned across your career competing at the highest level of sport into one piece of advice to help listeners of this show perform at their physical best, what would that single piece of advice be?
It's really hard to narrow it down to one piece of advice, but I would sort of say, build a good team around you, a team that you have a lot of confidence in, and a team that believe in you, and challenge them constantly. Challenge the norm, but first and foremost, get the fundamentals right. Don't get too preoccupied on the details until you've got the basics down pat.
Get the fundamentals right and build a team around you that they believe in you and you also challenge them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what about a piece of advice for the aspiring juniors out there?
I would say be as dynamic as possible in your approach. Don't pigeon yourself too early. And I think it's all about building resilience and building up your skill set to handle any situation. And there's some guys now literally competing at the very highest level in the sport that are good at so many different elements of the sport, and they are so hard to beat. When you look at guys like Wout van Aert, for example, who has the ability to win a mountain stage, a time trial and a sprint finish in the Tour de France. And I think a real key to his strengths is the fact that he's done so many different areas in the sport for so long. So he's so dynamic in his approach. And I would encourage anyone entering the sport, do different elements of the sport, do different sports as well to stimulate your body and to build resilience in different areas. So whatever you do, don't specialise too early.
Oh, gosh. As a sports physio, that's just music to my ears to hear that, Simon. It's well established that early specialisation can limit future performance for athletes. So that's rich. Wow. And finally, Gyro, a physical challenge for the week. Every guest of the show issues a physical challenge. Now, you are in quarantine at the moment. There's a whole bunch of food behind you there that I've been eyeing off. What is, and I think you're getting deliveries of food as we every night. There's a mysterious deliverer of food. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been for the last couple of nights. So the hotel quarantine food is pretty average. Like some of the meals that turn up are inedible. And so some angel somewhere has been organising me some takeaway food delivery for the past couple of nights. I've got no idea who it is, so it's quite funny. But no, yeah, what you see there is just a few leftovers, a bit of fruit and bits and pieces as well that I've put aside. Physical challenge, I don't know. I always say that your core can never be too strong. Doesn't matter what sport you're in, doesn't matter what you're doing. I think good core stability is the fundamental to so many great athletic performances. So if you can put a great core stability program together and make that as part of your regular training routine, you're off to a good start.
Yeah, brilliant. Any particular exercises that have served you well over the years, including hotel quarantine at the moment?
Well, what am I doing? I'm just doing a variety of a few different sit-ups, some planking as well, like some bits and pieces like that. Some just really basic stuff that I used to do years ago and really haven't committed the time to do it again for a long time. So it's just nice to get up every morning and, I'll have a cup of coffee and then just do 3/4 an hour of just core and stretching exercises.
Simon Gerrans, you have been prolific through your cycling career. You're seemingly prolific in your corporate career now. The service course, could you share a little bit about your role there, what the business is? It's a great follow on Instagram at The Service Course. Recommend everyone jump over and follow along. What's your day-to-day look like for The Service Course?
Yeah, so my role at Service Course, so I'm running the business. I'm the CEO of the Service Course, and it's a really interesting business actually because there's a lot going on. We have, at this point in time, we have 4 retail outlets spread out across 4 different countries in Europe. We have a travel business. We have an online platform as well. It's a very dynamic business. There's a lot going on, and as the name would insinuate, the Service Course is kind of your one-stop shop for a professional cycling team. It's where everything is kept. It's where you go for your resupplies. Often the teams will use a service course for riders to go and get recovery and that sort of thing as well. So the service course, from a retail perspective, we have the travel business, so you can come and hire bikes and get a massage and base your travel experiences around our shops. We also have a beautiful range of custom bikes on offer there too. We have our own brand clothing. So, and in a number of locations, we have a food and beverage element too. So we have cafes. So the service course is a lot of different elements of cycling all wrapped up into one business.
Yeah, lots of moving parts, and what a great person to have at the head of it yourself. And the Cycling Insights podcast obviously keeps you busy as well with Matt Keenan. What other projects have you got on the go?
I've got a young family that keeps me very busy as well. So
4 children.
4 kids, that's right. So, yeah, we have a very busy house at home. And, I've got two really little kids, but the older 2 are very active right into their sports. So I feel like I'm a bit of a taxi driver to a certain extent too.
Gosh. Well, look, Simon Gerrans, appreciate your contribution to the Physical Performance Show and certainly wish you all the best for navigating your way out of quarantine there and getting back to your beautiful family and beyond for this weird period of history in 2021.
Cheers. Thank you, Brad. Great to be involved.
So there you have it, another episode of the Physical Performance Show, and I trust and I know you enjoyed today's episode featuring Simon. Now, if you did, jump over, follow Simon online. You'll find him on Instagram easily at Simon Gerrans, Gerrans, and let Simon know what it was that you enjoyed from his share-ins today. Keep the podsies coming. That's a screenshot of the episode that you've enjoyed or are enjoying, and tagging in the show at Physical Performance Show for all the social handles, Instagram and Twitter. As mentioned, tickets for our upcoming live stream event featuring UK-based dietitian and author Rinny McGregor, Fueling the Endurance Athlete, are available but are filling fast. We have a 100-seat limit for this live stream, so be sure to jump in and secure your registration. Tickets are $49, available over at pogophysio.com.au/live stream. And this is such an important live stream full of learnings to be across. Now, if you are a patron of the Physical Performance Show, part of our $5 per month learnings membership, then the good news is we'll be granting you free access to this upcoming live stream event. If you'd like to support the show through Patreon, it's simple. Jump over to patreon.com, search for the Physical Performance Show, and there you can pledge your support from just $5 per month. And in return, we'll grant you access to not only upcoming live stream events, but also our back catalogue of live stream events, including 2020's very popular live streams with Dr. Stephen Seiler on all things polarised training and Dr. Shona Halson on all things optimising recovery. Now, if you are an endurance athlete that has just been struggling with a tendinopathy or repeat bone stress injuries, then reach out. We're here to help. You can do so by emailing me b.beer@pogophysio.com.au or jump straight over to pogophysio.com.au/telehealth and schedule your 45-minute online consultation. Here's a success story from recreationally competitive Tasmanian-based triathlete Sarah, who overcame some persisting bone stress injury concerns with her foot.
Hey, I'm Sarah. I'm a competitive age group triathlete from Australia, and telehealth 100% works. I did telehealth with Brad for chronic sesamoiditis, and I didn't need any hands-on treatment. I had exercise prescription and load management with my training. And this, along with Brad's expertise and genuine care, got me across my pogo finish line.
Thank you, Sarah. Massive thanks, as always, to the great folk who make this show possible each and every week. Daryl Misson, our audio engineer, Susan Wilkin on all things show administration, and Matthew Olding on all things show graphic design. And of course, this show is not possible without our partners, and a massive thank you, as always, to Precision Hydration for their support of the show. Don't forget, you can receive 15% off your first order of Precision Hydration, electrolytes, and their all-new Precision Fuel range by using the code TPPS at checkout at precisionhydration.com. I've been using the Precision Fuel Gels, 30 grams, and I've got to say the flavour is brilliant. It's neutral. It avoids some of that fatigue that you get with some of the sweeter gels. So do yourself a favour and check out the new Precision Fuel range. You will not be disappointed. Now, talking about fueling for your endurance performance, on next week's episode of the show, we've invited back Andy Blow, co-founder of Precision Hydration, to share around calculating your carbohydrate intake numbers. It's a simple skill, but an important one to see us perform at our best across our endurance sporting pursuits. So get set for next week's expert edition with repeat and very popular guest, Andy Blow, co-founder of Precision Hydration. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.